WFLA Now will begin momentarily. WFLA Now will begin momentarily. Live on WFLA Now, this is Hey JB. Here's JB Buno.
As anticipated, the parents of Brian Laundrie have responded with a motion to dismiss the lawsuit filed against them by Gabby Petito's parents, alleging that the Laundries knew all along that Brian had murdered Gabby. We have responses from both sides on this civil lawsuit as we break down this brewing legal battle here with you live on WFLA Now. Live with you across all platforms, folks. JB Buno here with you in our stream center. Glad to have you with us this Wednesday evening. Got a lot to break down, but really it comes down to these two documents. I'm going to hold them up here. This is, of course, the lawsuit that we talked about last time here on WFLA Now, the lawsuit filed by Joseph Petito and Nicole Schmidt, Gabby Petito's parents, against Chris and Roberta Laundrie, that being Brian Laundrie's parents. And now we have a lengthy, I believe it's 20 pages, make sure I have that right. It is a 20-page motion to dismiss, the argument for dismissal as articulated by the attorneys representing Chris and Roberta Laundrie, Brian Laundrie's parents. Let's first break down what we're going to do here on WFLA Now. For those of you who missed the lawsuit, let's first break down what is in the lawsuit that was filed, the lawsuit that made waves on the internet a few weeks back. There's a lot to it, and we want to let you know that you can click on the link in the description on this video. It'll take you over to WFLA.com, the WFLA app, where you can read more about the lawsuit itself and the motion to dismiss. But I'm going to kind of break this down here for you for the sake of time and for the sake of the fact that we, of course, talked about this last time with you on WFLA Now. So there's really three main allegations that we have in the lawsuit filed by Gabby Petito's parents. First is that in the aftermath, really the day after Brian murdered Gabby Petito, as of course the FBI has confirmed in their investigation, that Brian had told his parents and that Chris and Roberta Laundrie were aware that Brian had murdered Gabby, that something, of course, just terrible had happened between the two of them. That is, of course, the main center point of the lawsuit that was filed by Joseph Petito and Nicole Schmidt. There's also the allegation that the parents of Brian Laundrie attempted to get Brian out of the country, help him flee the country. And there's also the allegation as well that Nicole Schmidt, Gabby Petito's mother, was blocked on phone and on Facebook and could not contact Roberta Laundrie. I'm talking about now the mother-to-mother, could not talk to Roberta Laundrie, Brian Laundrie's mother, in the aftermath of Brian Laundrie returning home to Florida. Now we have this motion to dismiss right here. And I've been reading through it, and it's, of course, it puts forth now an argument to dismiss the lawsuit. And it lays out all the different reasons as to why the lawsuit should be dismissed. But before I go through the grounds for dismissal, what the attorneys representing Chris and Roberta Laundrie are arguing are grounds for dismissal in Sarasota County, Florida, I want to read for you the statements that we have from both sides. Of course, us doing our due diligence here, speaking to attorneys from both sides on this legal battle that is sort of brewing in these early stages now before we ever hit a courtroom. Of course, the documents that have been filed by both sides now. I spoke to the attorney representing the Laundries, that being Stephen Bertolino, who, of course, you have seen on WFLA Now in the past from previous interviews that he has conducted. And he says He sent this statement that says the following: a motion to dismiss the baseless and frivolous lawsuit commenced by Gabby Petito's parents was filed in court. The Laundries have exercised their constitutional right to refrain from speaking and have relied on counsel to speak for them. This is not only common practice in our civilized society, but it embodies the exercise of fundamental rights under the United States and Florida constitutions. The Laundries' rights are inalienable, and the Laundries can never be liable for exercising their legal rights in a permissible way. Myself and my colleagues at Trombley and Haynes, who are representing Chris and Roberta Laundrie in this matter, are confident that the constitutional rights of all citizens of this country will be protected by the dismissal of this lawsuit. We'll go over exactly more of what that means when we go over the lawsuit, the motion to dismiss itself. But yes, for those of you wondering, as far as what happens now legally with this civil lawsuit in Florida, they will not be, Chris and Roberta Laundrie will not be represented by Stephen Bertolino, the attorney who, of course, has made headlines for representing Chris and Roberta Laundrie. He is, of course, based out of East Islip on Long Island in New York. They are going to be represented by Trombley and Haynes. That's a law firm, of course, licensed to practice law here in the state of Florida. Now we have the motion to dismiss. I want to let everybody know that after I go through the grounds for dismissal here, what's being argued as the grounds for dismissal, we're going to go through your hashtag HJB comments. Want to get your reaction, of course, as we do with all of our streams, with all the stories that we cover. You can use hashtag HJB in the Facebook Live, YouTube Live comment sections, or on Twitter. We'll try to bring in as many as we can. Really want to spotlight what you have to say with this. And it's an anticipated development, but it's development nonetheless in a story that so many of you still want reporting on. So let's go now to, again, it's right here, sent to me. Defendant's motion to dismiss the complaint. It goes over some background, and we'll have to, of course, get legal analysis for this, but a lot of this document goes into the argument of, and the definition of, and the claim of intentional infliction of emotional distress, and whether or not there was intentional infliction of emotional distress by one party against the other, by Chris and Roberta Laundrie against Gabby Petito's parents. Withholding information from one party to the other is going to be at the center of this legal battle, and of course that information being whether or not they, Chris and Roberta Laundrie, knew of more details than what they were, of course, telling Gabby Petito's parents, which there wasn't any contact between the two. But now you're going to hear more in this document about how one side didn't really contact the other and how that's not illegal. And we're going to kind of get into that more into the document. But what that reflects, as far as the story that we have been covering, is that Joseph Petito and Nicole Schmidt, Gabby's mother and father, were desperately trying to get a hold of Brian Laundrie's parents, Chris and Roberta, just trying to get answers as to what happened to their daughter. You guys remember the press conference when Nicole Schmidt, Gabby's mom, was so visibly upset. You could just see the emotion brewing in Joseph Petito, Gabby Petito's father, as they were frustrated that they were unable to get through to Brian Laundrie's parents just to find out where their daughter was. And that breakdown in communication is argued a lot in these documents, but as it's articulated here by the attorneys representing Chris and Roberta Laundrie, it's not illegal to not talk to somebody. And we're going to get into that here, and whether or not it falls under a legal definition of, again, as going back here, a legal definition of intentional infliction of emotional distress, again, by inaction, the inaction of not speaking from one side to the other. I want to read this here. I'm going to go just kind of fast forward. A lot of this, of course, references other court cases, not anything out of the ordinary for any motion to dismiss. The plaintiff's legal theories are fatally flawed and could never be remedied by amendment, thereby requiring dismissal of the complaint with prejudice, is what's read, what we have here on page number 5. In section number 1, it then introduces the definition of what is outrageous conduct. And it says, importantly, the standard for outrageous conduct is particularly high in Florida. They then go into what is, and there's going to be a lot of legal jargon in here, but what is the standard for quote unquote outrageous conduct? It reads here on page 8, although the complainant, or excuse me, I'll read that again. Although the complaint alleges the Laundrie's conduct was quote unquote outrageous, the complaint's failure to provide factual support rising to the level of outrageous conduct makes that allegation nothing more than a legal conclusion. The essential allegations against the defendants are nowhere close to meeting the necessary standard. And this gets me now into my conversation with Pat Riley, who I spoke to on the phone in recent days, talking to him about the inevitability that there was going to be this motion to dismiss. Now, Pat Riley is the attorney in Florida, representing Joseph Petito and Gabby's mother, Nicole Schmidt. A lot of folks remember the name Rick Stafford. Rick Stafford, of course, also being in New York. Pat Riley is going to be representing Gabby Petito's family here in the state of Florida. And he told me, and we had a phone call where I was able to get some quotes from him, but he basically said, in response to where is the evidence, I asked him, I basically said on the phone to him, I said, Pat, there's a lot of folks looking through this document, looking for the evidence to back up these massive allegations that you've made against Chris and Roberta Laundrie. Where is the evidence? What is the evidence? I was looking for some details, just trying to get anything from him that he could provide to us. And he said, quote unquote, they'll have to wait and see. If we didn't believe it was true, we wouldn't have put them in the complaint. So Pat Riley is confident in the strength of the evidence that they have, that once it does make it to court, provided that this case isn't dismissed, if it does make it to court, they believe, they are confident in the evidence that they have to back up the allegations that Chris and Roberta Laundrie, Brian Laundrie's parents, were aware that Brian murdered Gabby. Let's continue going through a couple more pages of the document, and we'll get to really the conclusion because that kind of wraps everything up. It goes through all the allegations. It lists the key allegations in the lawsuit filed by Pat Riley on behalf of Gabby Petito's parents. And the attorneys for Brian Laundrie's parents respond, none of the allegations recited above, either alone or together, describe outrageous conduct. Continued on page 10, if the Laundrie's quote-unquote act of doing nothing other than maintaining their privacy and silence is enough to subject them to this supposed cause of action, then there would have been virtually no limitations on the tort of intentional infliction of emotional distress, and the fundamental right to remain silent under any circumstances would be obliterated. They are, of course, pointing to, you have the right to remain silent in this country. And that there is, of course, what the attorneys here are stating is that Brian Laundrie's parents not speaking to Gabby Petito's parents isn't unlawful and doesn't rise to the allegations of it being outrageous conduct, or, to quote earlier on the legal definition from earlier in the document, intentional infliction of emotional distress. This is at the heart of what we had talked about for so many streams here on WFLA Now. There was this lack of communication. Brian Laundrie's parents, they were not talking to Gabby Petito's parents. And while that was extremely frustrating, Brian Laundrie's parents, Chris and Roberta, were choosing to do all of their communication through legal representation, through the name that, of course, so many of you now know off the tip of your tongue, being Stephen Bertolino of East Islip, New York. That was extremely frustrating to people because so many people online, and I'm speaking for the commenters, people who I continue to have conversations with in direct messages and on Instagram and on Facebook and Twitter, people that still reach out to me about this story, who say that they are just overflowing with certainty that Brian Laundrie's parents knew more and that they were not speaking to the Petitos and the Schmidts for a very particular reason. It was because that they had something more. Of course, we have talked about this at great length on WFLA Now. We don't know because Chris and Roberta Laundrie have done all of their talking or lack thereof, really through their attorney, Stephen Bertolino. They have remained virtually silent, choosing to cooperate, of course, through law enforcement at the advice of their lead. And that's of course, we live in a country where you do have the right to remain silent. You are protected by constitutional rights. And there was a lot of frustration that there was this inability to get Chris and Roberta Laundrie to speak, but that, of course, is the protections afforded to you by the U.S. Constitution. So did the silence of Brian Laundrie's parents rise to this level of it being a despicable act where there's grounds for a civil lawsuit? It's kind of a stay tuned. To take the words from Pat Riley, the attorney representing Gabby's parents, you'll have to wait and see. And that's really why now we have this motion to dismiss setting up this massive question. Will there be a dismissal in Sarasota County Court? It's really up to the judge in this case. We'll, of course, follow up and try to provide you with some perspective on how strong the argument is here for dismissal. But let's not forget that the complaint in and of itself, of course, it's just a complaint. It hasn't reached the courtroom yet. There is no massive piece of evidence that we have on our hands that suggests that at this time that there should be a case for this to be heard in court and not dismissed. Again, you'll have to wait and see as far as what evidence Gabby Petito's parents have to back up that all along Brian Laundrie's parents knew of this murder. And then how do you back up what evidence could Nicole Schmidt, Joe Petito, and Rick Stafford, what evidence could they have as well that Brian Laundrie's parents were, attempting to help him flee the country? The Facebook and the texting blocking, I think that's pretty straightforward. If Nicole Schmidt was unable to, if it said that, that Roberta Laundrie's Facebook profile was blocked, I think that's going to be a little bit more straightforward. But to provide evidence that Brian Laundrie's parents knew all along of this heinous act, this murder that had occurred, again, as confirmed by the FBI's investigation, then I think the world is just itching to know. People who have been following this story religiously are very, very curious to know what that evidence is that they were aware that this terrible, terrible thing had happened to 22-year-old Gabby Petito. All right, let's get to some of the comments here. We're going to do 10 minutes of comments on WFLA Now. For those of you who, and I'm going to start looking now, for those of you who have been with us before, you know how this works. If you haven't, if you're a newcomer to our comment section, I have to explain this, so forgive me. For our regulars, if you use hashtag HeyJB, that means that you would like for your comment to be featured on screen. We really value your opinion. We want to spotlight what you have to say. We also use it as an opportunity to answer questions that you might have about the complexities of the stories that we cover. So if you have a question, if you just want your voice to be heard, use hashtag HeyJB. If you don't want your name and your picture and everything to be on a news live stream like this, maybe that's something you're not comfortable with, just don't use the hashtag. You can continue to comment and converse with your fellow commenters here live, and we'll just kind of let your comment scroll on by without plucking it out of the comment section. So with that said, let's get to some of the comments that are coming in. All right, let's get to. Oh, yeah, this is a. Okay, yeah, give me a second, everybody, because the comment section is just now lighting up, and I want to get to some of these, and some of them are very similar. Some of these comments are very strong worded. Wow. Apologies, just because there's a lot of vitriol in the comment section for, of course, one side of this equation. And with all due respect, I'm going to try to keep things as respectful as possible. All right, so Joshua Rizzuto, excuse me. Hi there, Josh. Hashtag HeyJB. So even with the right to remain silent, if they knew of a crime committed, could there still be legal action taken towards them? This is going to be a fundamental question for the civil lawsuit. I think first though, Josh, you have the right to remain silent. But is there some massive piece of evidence that they knew more than what the world knew pertaining to what had happened to Gabby Petito? Does Gabby Petito's family have that massive piece of evidence? And what does that evidence look like? Is it a conversation? Is it tangible, physical evidence? It's just kind of hard to describe. And a lot of these questions, folks, you need an attorney. You need an attorney that practices and is well-versed in civil lawsuits in Florida for me to answer. So I'll do my very best. But some of these get some of the ones I've seen already come up in our comment section are very, very particular when it comes to legal definitions. This is a very interesting question, and I'm glad that you asked it, Eric, because I was wondering the same thing. Hashtag HeyJB from Eric Brown. Just because the Laundrie is filed to dismiss, wouldn't it still go to court first to determine if the suit is baseless? So this is really at the heart of where we are with this back and forth between these two sides. We have Stephen Bertolino calling the lawsuit baseless and frivolous, correct? But can you really say that they are I mean, of course he's going to use those words to describe this lawsuit, but let's just take the third party approach for a second. For all of us kind of watching these two sides kind of in the early stages of duking it out here with these documents, for how do we know if it's baseless? If you put forth in the complaint and you put forth these allegations and that there's that absence of evidence, but then if, again, with my conversation with Pat Riley, the attorney representing Gabby Petito's parents, he says you have to wait and see. If we didn't believe it was true, we wouldn't have filed this complaint. Well, then what evidence is there that exists? Because if there is that massive piece of indisputable evidence, then these claims all of a sudden aren't baseless. He calls the claims baseless, does Stephen Bertolino, but I'd like to point out that I don't think that there's anything, and you have to forgive me because I read through this. I didn't word for word read through it. I read through it very, very quickly is what I'm trying to say. I did read every page, but I didn't really examine every sentence of this and analyze every sentence of it for what is the grand picture of the intent of all of these separate sections of the motion to dismiss. However, I think it's important to note that there's nothing in this motion to dismiss that says specifically that we have evidence to suggest that these claims are untrue. So what is truth and what is not true is hopefully going to come out in time. But Eric, I'm glad that you asked that question. We only have a few more minutes here, folks, before we're up against it. Abigail with a comment that I think a lot of folks have been, this is something that I get messaged about still, about this story, about the camping trip that occurred at Fort DeSoto in early September. Abigail saying, hashtag HJB, they went camping when Gabby was missing. I'd say that that's something. Just the peculiar nature of the camping trip is always something that comes up, that you return home without your fiance, and the camping trip is something that we've spoken about at great length on WFLA now. It's just an odd sort of moment in the timeline that kind of is a head scratcher for many, that given the circumstances of what was going on with the family, that going camping is a bit of a bizarre and peculiar choice of activity. in the opinions of, I'll go as far to say thousands of people that have commented on our live streams, perhaps tens of thousands. However, the nature of that camping trip and what was discussed and who know what and what the true purpose of it was is still really unanswered. I think, I can't speak for one side, but I think if you were to ask the Laundries, they would say we just went camping. We would go camping there all the time. That was the weekend that we had booked for a camping trip. We went and had s'mores. But again, it's all about what the truth is and whether or not we're going to get to the bottom of it. I think, folks, we do have to get going. This lawsuit coming out, it's coming up at a kind of a portion of the day where I can't stay live for a long period of time and continue to read comments, unfortunately. But let me just explain why I think so many people are still gravitating towards the civil lawsuit, and really this story in general, is because the truth, there's still so many unanswered questions. The truth of exactly what happened in late August and early September still eludes people of what really transpired, what happened when Brian made the trip home and then returned home, why there was this lapse of communication that occurred, this lack thereof of communication occurring between the Laundries and the Petitos and Schmitz. There's just so many unanswered questions, and I think I speak for a lot of our commenters, and I still read, again, those messages I get on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. There's still just this feeling, this unsettling feeling in the guts of a lot of people out there, in the stomachs of a lot of people, this unsettling feeling about this story. It was a feeling that originated with when the story originally blew up the way that it did in September, and it has, for a lot of folks, it has really lingered, and it's going to continue to linger until they get some of these key questions answered. None bigger than, why is Gabby dead? I think that people have of course, they have their endless theories. You can go on any of the social media platforms that are big in the United States and search for Gabby Petito, Brian Laundrie. Believe me, you're going to find theories of what occurred between the two. But really, why these two are dead, the exact reason, still remains a mystery. No one knows the true answer, or at least no one that is speaking knows the true answer. We hope to find out more answers. At WFLA, we are committed to getting as many answers as possible, and we are going to continue to follow this civil lawsuit that has been filed, because if it ever does hit a courtroom floor, then the cards that are in each hand of their respective sides of the poker table, so to speak, each hand is going to be public to the world. And we're going to have more details on whether or not these allegations are baseless and frivolous, in the words of Steve Bertolino. So, folks, we're going to continue to stay on this story. That's our commitment, of course, to you. And I want to let you know that on WFLA.com, the WFLA app, we have more. You can read more about the Laundries filing to dismiss this lawsuit. We have all of our coverage for you there, in addition to other stories that we are covering at this hour on WFLA.com, the WFLA app. I'll continue to, of course, pay attention to my social media profiles, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and try to communicate with as many folks as possible as we stay, kind of rooted in reality with this story. I appreciate everybody joining us. We'll see you next time, folks, on WFLA Now.